Good evening, mates. My name is Sir Goodwin, and yes, before you guys make any American jokes, yes, that is a bottle of bourbon that is under me, and I will tell all of you the story of how I got to be built. And yes, the whole globe is an old school map of what the countries used to look like, and you all will be surprised of like where all the places I have been the last 600 years of my existence. Now, before I was in this office, by this gaming console you Americans call a PS4, I was pretty damn important, I used to be owned by the best world leaders in the world, and I was built around the 1400s, by Leonardo da Vinci, and he had such good craftsmanship, and how he built me, and he said that I was a work of art, and when I was a work of art, and then he sold me to a British businessman, that paid him in golden Italian coins, and then from there I was taken from Italy to Great Britain. And then after that, I was then owned by a lot of kings. I was owned by a lot of kings in Europe, especially in England. And then I was owned by King George III. And then unfortunately what happened was then there was a war between the Italians and the Europeans. And then, of course, there was the Great War of Italy versus England that happened. And so I was owned by King George III. But then, unfortunately, what happened was then King George got killed, and then the settlers, kidnapped me, and then from there I was taken to a new land that was called America. And so from there, then I was taken to where the Pilgrims were, but then unfortunately, then all hell broke out, and then of course the Revolutionary War started, between America and England, and then of course the Redcoats stole me back, and then I lived back in England again, and then from there I saw all the kings and queens of England. And then, of course, from there, I also even saw Queen Elizabeth. And then, of course, I saw King George as well. And I will get to him really, really soon. And so, then after that, after King George III, failed at governing England once again, then, during the Revolutionary War, a lot of the American soldiers broke into the castle, and they stole me for good, and from there, I never came back to England ever since. And so then from there, I met a lot of the new leaders of the new world, including America's first president, George Washington. I met, I was placed inside, the presidential mansion in New York City, and I saw George Washington govern, and he was a great president. And then from there, I saw John Adams, the second president, govern. And unfortunately, though, he was not very good at governing his own country. And a lot of his countrymen, unfortunately, didn't like him. And from there, I saw a lot of other presidents govern, And then I saw the capital change, from New York City to Washington, D.C. And then I saw more presidents come and go as they came. And unfortunately, I saw a lot of great battles take place, including the time when America lost against the French. And then also some other battles as well, including the American Civil War, between the Confederates and the Union, and when Abraham Lincoln was president. And then I also saw Theodore Roosevelt enter the White House, and then other presidents after that. And then as we got to the Roaring '20s, that's where things really started to get really interesting. A lot of Americans were partying, and, and they were dancing, and, and a lot of people, fancy to dance and all that stuff. And it was just really very crazy time to be in America, but then unfortunately all that fun and Diddy didn't really last, because unfortunately then what happened was then America, as well as Europe, unfortunately got into the Great Depression. And then unfortunately then what happened was Franklin Delano Roosevelt then won the White House. And then of course, it was the first time, as a globe, I actually met a human that actually had to be in a wheelchair, and that's when he started creating the New Deal. And then that's when he started, doing a lot of other things that a world leader unfortunately did as well. And then from there, I then got to spend a lot of time with him, and then he got to talk to me whenever he had a lot of trouble going on, and then that's when, World War II started, and then unfortunately Great Britain was attacked by Germany, and it was attacked by Hitler, and it was not good, and so then that's when World War II started, and then that is when I had to join the army, and then we had to attack the Germans. But then I managed to get back home just fine and dandy. And so when I got back to the White House, things were getting really, really crazy, ever since, Franklin Delano Roosevelt died. Harry Truman came in, and unfortunately he had a very strange and particular farming accent, and it was very hard to understand Harry Truman, and then of course, Dwight D. Eisenhower was just like that as well, but he was a little bit interesting to talk to. And so then I spent a lot of time in my goodness gracious, American culture, definitely changed, in that from 1940s to like the 1950s, you just saw a lot more different things, coming, you saw a lot more fancy cars, you saw a lot more fancy roads, you saw a lot of fancy malls, and then even during the war, the Great World War II, I saw Europe, and then I got to go back there and, and see all the remaining things of back to where I started. And so then, then after Dwight D. Eisenhower left the White House, then that's when John F. Kennedy showed up, and boy, things were starting to go very dilly silly. And so then after, President Kennedy, came into the White House, and things, even though he had a lot of great accomplishments, that happens, a lot of things unfortunately didn't go well. Like, for example, he then started hitting on a lot of beautiful American women, and he went swimming with them, and then he started hitting on a Hollywood actress named Marilyn Monroe, and unfortunately his brother Bobby had to unfortunately cover him, and unfortunately, President Kennedy unfortunately was cheating on his wife, and I mean, it was just not very good. Unfortunately though, there was times, just like with FDR, when he had trouble, with the pressures of the job, he then was talking to me, and and even though I'm a very old globe, and I've been around, I think, since the 1400s, I tried to give him as many advice as possible. And then, when he said he couldn't handle cheating on his wife and all stuff, and I said, what the bloody hell are you doing? You can't be doing that, then your wife is gonna find out, what the bloody hell are you doing? And so, it was just not good. And so then, I yelled at him, and so, it was just, unfortunately, it was just not very good, and it was just not very presidential of him, but then unfortunately, then what happened was then, he then went to Dallas, Texas, and unfortunately, after that, unfortunately, he died of his presidential assassination in Dallas, and it was just very sad, because even though he had his flaws, he was still a very good president, to talk to. Unfortunately, then things got even more silly, and then that's when Lyndon Johnson came, and then he was even worse than President Kennedy. He started doing a lot of, a lot of Texas dancing, and he fancied a Texas dance, and he started dancing like what you Americans call cowboys, and my goodness, I mean, he was just a very, very wild man. It was just crazy, and it was just, and then I remember, there was times where there was a bunch of country and cowboy music going, and unfortunately, there was just all this crap going on, and I said, like, and I looked around, and I was going like, what the bloody hell is going on? And so then I just caught him dancing and all that stuff, and I was just cringing at all this stuff, and I was like, sir, are you mad? You can't be doing this in the White House, sir. This is outrageous. And unfortunately, then there was times where, when he unfortunately had to go, to the what, and it was awful. And then on top of all that, he was not a very good world leader, especially when he dealt with Vietnam, and it was just not good. And And so, unfortunately, that day, that was when President Lyndon Johnson, resigned, and my goodness, good riddance. He was just a very, very, very crazy man. So anyway, then as Lyndon Johnson then left the White House, then the 1968 presidential election came, and my God, it was the most bloodiest election ever. You had protesters fighting all over the big cities, especially like New York and Dallas and Miami, and then you had a bunch of cowboys, fighting people on the left, and oh my God, my word, it was just so bloody. I don't even know how Richard Nixon was even elected president. But anyways, when he came into office, I remember, it being in the Oval Office, watching how he worked, and my word, he was just such a hard worker. Like he was always on the telephone, and calling people. He even went to China, to do something called diplomacy, and I don't know. I mean, he was just a really good leader, and he proved me wrong. Unfortunately, though, however, I did feel bad for him because of Watergate, and all that stuff. And unfortunately, that was not really fun. And unfortunately, I felt bad that he had to resign the oath of office. Yeah. And then, then from there, Gerald Ford came, and he was a lot of fun, and all that jazz, and then, unfortunately, and then, of course, Jimmy Carter was elected president, and like Lyndon Johnson before, he was from the southern part of the United States, and he was kind of, unfortunately, quite the opposite of Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, to the point where he was kind of not a very hard worker, and so he kind of left office, and all that stuff. But I do remember during Gerald Ford's presidency, there was a lot of disco dancing, people dancing to disco in the Oval Office, and I believe Gerald Ford's daughter actually had a high school prom that was inside the White House and all that jazz, and that was pretty fun, and I remember just bobbing my big head, at the disco music that was playing, and it was just very interesting. And then, unfortunately, I think, Jimmy Carter wasn't elected to another term, in office. And so that's when Ronald Reagan came. And that's when Ronald Reagan, I actually really bonded, with him a lot, because he really respected the British culture, especially the country that I came from, which was Britain, And so then, Ronnie came up to me, and he said to me in his very American accent, he said, Goodwin, I think, we should go back to Britain to see your home country. You'd be surprised at how much it's really changed a lot. And so then I was like, well, gee, I don't know about that, Mr. President. And so then, we then went on Air Force One, and it was the first time I went on Air Force One for the first time in the 1980s. And so then I saw Britain for the first time, and it was in the second British invasion. And I remember the first British invasion happening in the 1960s, especially like with the Beatles and all that stuff. And unfortunately, though, they were kind of part of the hippie movement as well. And so anyways, then I was in Great Britain, and I saw all the funny hairdos, and people, and a lot of like people listening to Aha and Duran Duran and all those other good British bands, and people bobbing their heads, and people being on roller skates, and then I got to go see Queen Elizabeth again, for the first time since like the 1960s or something. And then from there, I actually got to see, Princess Diana, and my God, was she very beautiful and very stunning. And it was just such a really wonderful dream come true. And I got to see the palace, and I got to see Buckingham Palace, and I got to see that. And then I got to see Big Ben, and then, of course, I was playing the song London Fallen and all that jazz. And so then, after all that fun, after Ronald Reagan's presidency, unfortunately, the White House sold me they unfortunately sold me in a garage sale. And then that's when this family from Washington State, purchased me. And then from there, I've seen this house, have a lot of, remodels and a lot of different things coming in, and I mean, yeah, I mean, and then that's when I've been in this office ever since, not ever since the early 2000s, and yeah. As for the events of living in this house, well, it can't be all that bad. I mean, there is this one individual that I see, you know, that he works on a lot of silly videos like that are on this one website that you Americans call YouTube, and that he works on a lot of different videos, and he's sometimes playing the PS4 and sometimes playing what I call electronic American football, and you know, such as playing Madden or playing American baseball, and sometimes playing basketball and all that stuff. And then sometimes I do see him, you know, having some friends over from time to time, you know, like he sometimes will have, you know, different friends come over. You know, there's this one other tall gentleman that sometimes will come, and you know, they enjoy, you know, each other's company a lot, and you know, and then sometimes he eats a lot of, you know, big time meals and all that stuff, and yeah, I mean, it's just like very, very interesting, you know, living in this house, you know, and yeah, that is just, you know, my life right now. I mean, I've been around since, you know, the 1400s, and I've seen a lot of wars, I've seen a lot of world leaders, especially in America and sometimes in England, and I mean, I've just had a very, very interesting life, and I don't know, I don't know what the future is going to be. You know, I really don't know what the future is going to be. I mean, for my sake, I think we're going to have like flying cars and all that stuff. And I think once I see a flying car, like in the year 29 or in the year 3000, I mean, I'm going to be beside myself. I'm just going to be like, my word, you know, and whoever has a good time invention or something, my words, I'm going to say to that person, dilly dilly. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very interesting time, and hopefully in this time hopefully we don't run into any inconsistent people, and yes, I really hope that we don't run into any trouble and all that stuff, and anyway, since Christmas is coming up and the holidays, you know, I really hope all of you have a very nice holiday, and hopefully you guys have a very wonderful Christmas, and I hope Santa brings you a lot of presents under the Christmas tree. Anyway, goodbye everyone, and I hope you guys have a very dilly Christmas. Anyway, goodbye everyone.
Audio Jungle.